Hello, and welcome to today's program, Beyond the Diagnosis, Non-Medication and Complementary Therapies. My name is Annie Long, and I'm an Associate Director of Community Programs for the Parkinson's Foundation. Today's program is hosted by the Parkinson's Foundation Tennessee, Kentucky chapter in collaboration with the University of Tennessee Medical Center. The Parkinson's Foundation is grateful for the unwavering support of our program sponsors, AbbVie, Amneal, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, Kyowa Kirin, and Lundbeck. We invite you to view our full list of sponsors and learn more about them by visiting our chapter supporters webpage, which you can find in the chat. The Parkinson's Foundation is the nation's largest community for people living with Parkinson's, those who love them, and those who are working to end the disease. Whether you are newly diagnosed, looking for a specialist, or needing a support network, we have everything you need to live better with Parkinson's. Contact our free bilingual helpline staffed by Parkinson's experts and check out our educational books, webinars, and podcasts for the latest information on medications, treatments, and tips. We have everything you need to take control of your health and your life. To ease the challenges of physical distancing, we launched PD Health at Home, an interactive series of virtual events designed for the Parkinson's community. Every week, you could tune in for Mindfulness Mondays that include guided relaxation and mindfulness events, and Wellness Wednesdays that feature experts discussing critical Parkinson's topics. And each Friday, we release new Parkinson's-specific exercise videos that you can participate in from the comfort of home. PD Generation, Mapping the Future of Parkinson's Disease, is a first-of-its-kind national initiative that provides genetic testing for clinically relevant PD-related genes and counseling to people with Parkinson's at no cost in English and Spanish. The goal of PD Generation is to leverage genetics as a powerful tool to help us uncover what is responsible for slowing or stopping the progression of Parkinson's. This knowledge will propel us toward optimizing Parkinson's treatments and advancing clinical trials. As a national organization with local presence and impact, our chapters are essential in helping us bring help and hope to the 1 million people in the US living with Parkinson's. If you haven't already, we hope you will reach out to our local Tennessee, Kentucky chapter. We look forward to connecting with you. Every Thursday, beginning April 1st, the Tennessee, Kentucky chapter will host Empower Hours, which are great opportunities to come together with others from your local community. For more information and to register, please visit our chapter site at parkinson.org/TNKY/events. We hope you'll get moving with us at an upcoming Moving Day Walk for Parkinson's event. By participating, you can help us raise money to advance research, fund our Center of Excellence network, and provide educational resources and programs across the country. First up is our Moving Day Knoxville event, which will be a drive-through celebration this year on Saturday, May 1st at 9 a.m. at Iams Park. For more information and to register, visit movingdayknoxville.org. Again, we hope that you'll use the Parkinson's Foundation as a resource and support system throughout your Parkinson's journey. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Christopher Tolleson, who is a movement disorder specialist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center and the medical director of the Cole Neuroscience Movement Disorder Center. Please continue submitting your questions for our presenters via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your viewing page. We will do our best to address as many of them as we can during the Q&A session after the presentation.
Well, Annie, thank you for the kind introduction. I am going to be talking about complementary and non-medication treatments in Parkinson's disease. I hope you guys all take something from this, and I appreciate you being on the presentation. Next slide, please. So real quickly, I've done consulting over the last several years for a variety of medical companies. Two of them are Parkinson's companies, Medtronic and AbbVie. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that the Cole Movement Disorders Clinic has received a community grant from the Parkinson Foundation in 2019 and 2020. And we're very grateful for their support, but they're supporting us as well. So this is a basic outline of what I'll be talking about. I get a lot of questions about most of these topics, especially the first three. So I really what I want to do is present some of the evidence on some of these things. Some things I'll be talking about is supplements, diet, cannabis, sleep, and social interaction. I think this is probably the most important slide from my slide deck. This seems rather trite and probably a little vague, but this is what I tell all my patients in the clinic. You can get kind of bogged down in some of the minutia and some of the clinical details, but as best you can, be healthy, be active, be social, and connected. Please, please take this slide to heart. Like I said, this is probably the most important slide in my slide deck. All right, so the first topic that I'm going to talk about in the meat of my talk is supplements. And this slide kind of gives an overview of some of the basic data that we have on supplements. So as I've written here in the first bullet point, no supplement has been proven to our highest level of scientific trials. And that's a trial with usually at least several hundred people where you compare an inactive drug to an active drug. In this case, an inactive substance to a supplement. And we've never seen an impact on the disease or the symptoms in Parkinson's disease in these very high-level trials. That being said, most of them have not been studied to that degree. There's certainly a lot of animal trials that have shown some potential benefit in supplements and even some small human trials. But again, in the highest level of trials, we just haven't seen the impact that we would like. I would also tell you that whether natural or not, supplements are not well regulated. They're certainly not regulated by the FDA. They can come in different dosing sizes. And so it's very hard to make sure that you're getting the same dose as someone else that may or may not be describing a benefit. And then finally, just like with medication, when you start combining different things, it's hard to say how they're interacting and whether or not they might be having harmful effects. So I've had some people come in with multiple supplements, and you just need to be careful when you're taking multiple things, especially that we don't fully understand. Next one, please. So supplements that could cause problems that I warn folks about, vitamin B6 can speed up the metabolism of levodopa in the blood. Most of the time we give levodopa, people take it with carbidopa. So that effect seems to be marginalized. The data is a little bit confusing. Some drugs can actually lower B6. One in particular, Duopa, has been known to do that. And I've seen studies that have shown B6 to be low in Parkinson's patients. So it's a little bit conflicting. I think a B vitamin is fine, but I personally don't usually recommend taking extra B6 because again, it can speed up metabolism of levodopa. And the other thing I should warn you about is iron seems to impact the absorption of carbidopa levodopa as well. The supplement I most commonly recommend, especially in people that don't want to take medication, mucuna is the velvet bean, and they've actually distilled and concentrated extract from the velvet bean into a supplement. You can see the bottle there down on the bottom right. In the velvet bean, you actually see about a 4 to 7% amount of dopamine in the bean. So it's a natural source of levodopa. One thing I failed to mention on that slide is that one of the things we do with medication is when people take levodopa, they also take it with carbidopa, and that prevents the breakdown of levodopa in the bloodstream. And so that natural source of levodopa does not have that carbidopa component. And so the absorption is not as good as you would see with a medication. As we move on to this next slide here, common supplements, probably the one I see most people on is coenzyme Q10, which is an antioxidant. Certainly laboratory studies have shown benefit on nerve cells, and even early human trials have suggested some benefit. Unfortunately, in the large definitive trial, which was published in 2014 to the Parkinson study group, it showed the supplement to be safe, but it didn't show any benefit. They did 267 participants. 94 of them were on placebo or inactive drug or supplement. 87 received a lower dose at 1,200 milligrams a day, and 86 received a higher dose at 2,400 milligrams a day. 65 participants actually dropped out before the trial was ended, whether that was from side effects or just not seeing any benefit. And when the people that were running the trial actually did an analysis in the mid part of the trial, the data they were getting was unfortunately so poor that they could not continue the trial in good faith. It was just the data they were getting did not justify continuing putting patients at risk of being in the trial. Next slide, please. These are some other supplements that have been studied in large clinical trials. They studied vitamin E some time ago. This was the DataTop trial that was published in '93, and they did 800 participants. They unfortunately did not find benefit with vitamin E. Creatine was a more recent supplement study. It's a nutritional supplement that seemed to have antioxidant properties. It was tried in the NET-PT LS1 trial, which was published in 2015. It was done through the National Institute of Health. And they had almost 1,000 participants in this trial. And much like the coenzyme Q10 trial, this was ended early because they just weren't seeing data that justified continuing the trial. And then finally, they studied something called inosine, which is a urate precursor. When they've done large population studies, higher levels of uric acid seem to be associated with less risk of Parkinson's disease. And that's an association, not a cause and effect. But they wanted to study it in trials. So there was something called a SURE-PD trial. And unfortunately, much like some of these other supplements, this was ended early in 2019 because they just weren't seeing the data when they analyzed it in the mid part of the trial to justify continuing. Next slide. These are other supplements that I get asked about commonly. Glutathione is one that I get asked about a lot. It's an antioxidant. It's certainly shown some benefit in animal studies. There's been some very small human studies. The highest number I saw was about 20. It's not absorbed orally very well. It comes in IV formulations. You can get it intranasally. The study I saw with 20 people was an IV study. Again, the data is just not good, even in these very small human trials. They've seen maybe some benefit, but even the inactive drug group in that 20-person trial was having a lot of benefit, and they weren't seeing a lot of difference between active drug and inactive drug. Mannitol is a sugar. It was getting a lot of press recently. We use it in medicine as a diuretic and sometimes relieve pressure on the brain. Some non-human studies, particularly in the fruit fly, suggested it might prevent alpha-synuclein from clumping. Alpha-synuclein is the protein deposit that we see in Parkinson's disease. And we do think that it is possibly causative for Parkinson's disease. We're not totally sure, but there's a lot of trials looking at decreasing alpha-synuclein. And when it clumps, it gets abnormal. And so they've been looking at it, and it may hold some promise, again, mostly in animal trials. I know there's a phase 2 trial currently in the works in Israel that they're looking at this. The right-hand column, there's a lot of other supplements that I've heard about or been asked about. Some of them are given in combinations. Almost all of these have just had trials in animal studies. And the animal studies, again, seem to show some benefit, but we just haven't studied them very much in human trials. And again, the ones that we just haven't seen the benefit. And I would say, unfortunately, that's the case with medications as well. We have tons of medications that are studied in animal trials that seem to show some benefit, but when we move to human trials, they may show some benefit at small levels, but when we do the big studies, we just don't see the fruit. And the mechanisms make sense, the science makes sense, but it just doesn't bear out. And it's always very frustrating, but again, a lot of these supplements, we don't have the data yet to make firm recommendations. And when we do have the data, it hasn't been good. Next slide. So I get asked, or starting to get asked a lot about probiotics. So probiotics are substances with live microorganisms, and they seem to better balance the organisms in the gut. So they enhance the good ones and limit the bad ones. And you can get this through natural diet, using things like yogurt and fermented milk. They also have supplements that are probiotics as well. The gut is a really exciting topic right now in Parkinson's disease. So we know for sure the organisms in the gut in Parkinson's patients are different, at least in concentrations, from those without the disease. We're not totally sure on what that composition looks like, but we know it's different. And we're also getting a lot more evidence that Parkinson's disease may actually begin in the gut. That alpha-synuclein protein that I was talking about before, we're finding it in the gut. And there's a lot of theories that those alpha-synuclein deposits start in the gut and then move up a big nerve called the vagus nerve and enter the brain. Next slide. So what does that mean for probiotics? So it's possible, given that the bacteria or the microorganisms in the gut are different in Parkinson's disease compared to someone without, that the bacteria could be contributing either by inflammation or problems with the immune system or a host of other reasons, that those bacteria may be contributing to making those alpha-synuclein deposits either come there or behave abnormally. And that could be a potential cause for Parkinson's disease. So we don't have a lot of information yet on probiotics. There's a few studies that looked at fermented milk with higher lactobacillus, which could help constipation and bloating. Bowel issues like constipation are very frequent in Parkinson's disease and a constant problem that I deal with. In terms of kind of the major symptoms of Parkinson's disease that we call the motor symptoms, so your movement problems, I was able to find a trial, again, with higher lactobacillus content in only 30 patients, though, for 12 weeks, and it did seem to help Parkinson's motor skills a little bit. I looked on clinicaltrials.gov, which is our website for big clinical trials, before I started doing this presentation. There are a couple studies out there looking at probiotics, hoping to see if they will help motor symptoms as well. There's one in London, and I think there's one in China. There's not a trial here that I'm aware of around Tennessee or the Kentucky area, but I would continue to watch for this. This is a really hot topic in Parkinson's disease. What I would say is you just need to be careful with probiotics. I don't currently recommend them, and I've kind of put in italics here at the bottom of my slide. The PD gut seems to have a higher level of lactobacillus. I've seen some studies where they say it's a lower level. But some studies are actually indicating it may have a negative effect on dopamine neurons, the ability of dopamine to get from the gut to the brain. Now, maybe there are different strains of lactobacillus. Certainly, I've seen a couple of strains that seem to have some antioxidant effects and anti-inflammatory effects, and other strains may be concerning. But a lot of the probiotics that I've seen have higher lactobacillus content, and as I mentioned in the upper part of the slide, a lot of the trials have had upper or higher levels of lactobacillus content, but I just think we need to be careful because we just don't fully understand yet which microorganisms are bad, which ones are good, and what effects they have on Parkinson's disease. Next slide. Diet is a question I get asked all the time. So I will tell you there is no definitive diet for Parkinson's disease. It can be hard to study. It's awfully hard to tell a patient to stay on a particular diet and be very, very strict for months on end to kind of see how this affects Parkinson's disease. What I would probably recommend, especially from some of the supplements that you saw, I would recommend a diet high in antioxidants. I'd probably recommend more of a plant-based diet. But getting back to my earlier slide, I really want you to be healthy. So I want you to have a balanced diet. I don't want you to eliminate meat completely from your diet. The best thing you can do is be balanced in everything you do. So in terms of the evidence we have, the best evidence seems to be from the Mediterranean diet, or a similar diet called the Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, or the MIND diet. Most of the studies we have are population studies, but they have shown less Parkinson's when individuals are on the Mediterranean diet. And when they do get Parkinson's disease, if they're on this diet, they seem to have symptoms at a later age. Excellent. So this is kind of a breakdown of what the Mediterranean diet is. The best advice I can give you is find a diet with lots of color, as you can see there on the picture there. Your base should really be a lot of fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds. Certainly, meat is an important part of the diet, but certain types of meat are better than others. Seafood is probably the best. Chicken or poultry is next, and then as little red meat and processed meat as possible. Mild to moderate dairy and eggs is important. Really limiting processed food overall and sugary beverages is important. Fat is still important, but trying to get it through olive oil and nuts is the best. And then whole grains are really important as part of that diet. Next slide, please. So this is a food pyramid kind of visually showing what I'm talking about. So if you look there at the bottom, it says daily physical exercise and eating with family. So just another point again, exercise, exercise, exercise. It really is that important. But you can see the base there is whole grains, breads, beans and legumes and nuts. And then right above it, you have your fruits and vegetables. Those are your base of your diet. Olive oil for fats. And then right above that, you do need meat in your diet, but really focusing on seafood. And then right above that, poultry is important. A little bit of dairy and eggs is important. And then finally, as little as possible, your processed meats, your red meats, and your sweets. Something else I recommend, much like the velvet bean, there's something called the fava bean, which is a green bean, and it does seem to contain natural dopamine. So that's just something I tell people if they ask me specifics about diet. Next slide. So what about liquids? We've talked a lot about solids. So liquids. So coffee drinkers in large population studies seem to have a lower incidence of Parkinson's disease compared to those that don't drink a lot of coffee. We think that the major part of coffee that is beneficial is caffeine. We're not totally sure. But when we've done clinical trials on on caffeine, we really unfortunately haven't seen the benefit and the symptoms that we would like. There is a medicine that is now on the market called estradiol that's now been on the market for a couple of years. It shares a similar mechanism to how we think caffeine actually helps Parkinson's disease. It is an add-on treatment. I've had moderate, maybe mild to moderate benefit. It's still relatively new, and I'm still looking at it with my patients, but it does seem to help to some degree. The other thing I always mention with diet is water. Water is so important. Drinking lots of water will help you combat blood pressure drops, which we see frequently with the disease or with some of the medicines we use. And it also will help constipation. So having high water content in your diet is really, really important. So potential diet problems. So protein, if you're taking carbidopa-levodopa or some formulation of that, there's something called Ritari that's also carbidopa-levodopa. There's something called Stalevo that's also carbidopa-levodopa. Protein will compete with your carbidopa-levodopa. So we certainly try and tell people to take it on an empty stomach if they can. If you can separate it out by 30 to 60 minutes before, about 2 hours after, we tell you to try and do that. If that's difficult, you could also try and get your protein at the end of the day. The main thing I tell my Parkinson's patients is, I really want you to get it in, and I don't want your schedule to be so onerous you can't live your life. So if trying to separate it out from food is just way too difficult, I really want you to get in the medicine regularly. If we're starting to notice that absorption is really poor when you eat, then we can make allowances for that. But the main thing is, again, try and be healthy. If you can take it on an empty stomach, great. But really want you to take your medicine as regularly as possible. And I know that can be difficult trying to separate things out from meal times. There's starting to be a little bit of research out there about dairy products. There was a trial that came out a couple of years ago that seemed to indicate that low-fat milk might have or cause a higher risk of developing Parkinson's disease. This is population studies. Again, really hard to prove cause and effect. And this is really preliminary, but I thought I would throw that out there since I'm talking about diet. And then finally, tyramine-containing foods. This is only a concern if you're taking very particular types of Parkinson medicines called MAO-B inhibitors. And even then, MAO inhibitors are a concern, but we use very small doses in Parkinson's disease. We also use what we call selective MAO inhibitors. These are called MAO-B inhibitors. It's very unlikely that you would have any type of complication, but if you have a good pharmacist or you like to read, you will probably come across this as a concern. I've never seen this, but you do need to think about things like fermented alcohol, aged cheese, cured or smoked meat if you are taking these medications, but you'd really have to overdo it. I mean, you'd have to gorge on it. You'd have to really overdo the wine or beer intake. If you're using it in mild to moderate, sources, then you should be okay. Again, balance is really important with Parkinson's disease with everything you do, and that's the case with diet as well, and with some of these concerning tyramine-containing foods. Next slide, please. So something else I mentioned in case you like to travel, in the West Indies, Caribbean, we have seen certain tropical foods that may be neurotoxic because of Parkinson's-like condition. So things like the pawpaw, which is in that bottom left corner, custard apples, which I think is the one in the bottom right, and soursop. have all been linked to possibly causing neurotoxicity. So it is something to be aware of if you travel. Just be careful of some of the fruits that people might serve you if you're going to some of these areas. All right, cannabis, which I used to get asked a lot about. I don't get asked about it as much as I used to. So CBD oil is legal in Tennessee, but medical marijuana is not. CBD stands for cannabidiol, which is a common chemical in the cannabis or marijuana/hemp plant. My understanding is most people call the plant a marijuana plant if it has a high THC content. If it has a higher CBD content, they call it the hemp plant. CBD oil by its nature has none or very negligible amounts of THC, less than 0.3%, so it is not psychoactive. As a general rule, there are no standards or regulations on dosing, labeling, or product purity with cannabis products, so you need to be careful with them. They are definitely not regulated by the FDA. And I also tell people that none of our major Parkinson organizations or our main neurology organization, the American Academy of Neurology, currently recommend cannabis as a treatment for the major Parkinson symptoms. Next slide. This slide and the next slide lists some of the bigger clinical trials or human clinical trials in Parkinson's disease. And when I say bigger, that's still not very big. If you look on this slide, the highest trial is only 22 patients. There has been some animal data that maybe shows some benefit with cannabis, but for the most part, we really haven't seen that borne out in clinical trials. And again, most of our clinical trials are very small. I've talked before with supplements about the high levels of clinical trials, which is when we compare active substance to inactive substance. And if you look at this slide, the first trial and then the last two trials are those high-level trials. But again, we're talking about hundreds of patients typically when we have a good clinical trial. These are 17 at the most. Even then, if you look at the top trial, they were looking at dyskinesia and motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease, and really didn't see an improvement in that first trial. If you look at the bottom two trials, the second to last one also didn't see a benefit. And then we looked at the very last one. There was some benefit in that trial with dyskinesia, and that was only 5 patients. The other two trials, the second and third trial in those columns, they saw some benefit with tremor and bradykinesia in the third trial, and in the second trial, they really didn't see any benefit. Again, all very small trials. Case series are just a collection of different patient presentations. Next slide, please. This slide contains 4 trials. Only the last one is our highest level of trials. And again, this one didn't show any patient benefit other than maybe in some of our scales looking at quality of life. This is only 20 patients. If you look at the first trial on this slide, this was the largest trial we had. This is 84 patients. And this was actually a questionnaire that was given to patients. We would call this not very scientifically rigorous. But about half patients did describe some benefit in their Parkinson's symptoms, including their tremor and dyskinesias. If you looked at the second and third trial on this slide, these were also very small trials in 4 to 6 patients. And they saw in one of them decreased psychotic symptoms and the other seemed to help dream enactment by patient and spouse report. Next trial, or next slide. So my personal experience, I really haven't seen a lot of benefit on the major Parkinson's symptoms in people that have tried cannabis products. Those that have derived some benefit usually stop taking them after some period of time because it just isn't sustainable. I have seen some benefit mostly in sleep. I've also seen some data that's been a little bit better on pain, weight loss, and nausea with some of these cannabis products. So that may have a role there. I would just tell you to be cautious with it. Again, it's not, those products are not well regulated. Certainly there are side effects that can happen with these products, just like with anything. With medical marijuana and something that's a little bit more psychoactive, you can have addiction. There's lung issues if you smoke it. Again, if it's psychoactive, you can have problems with cognition. mood and behavioral changes. We also see things like dizziness, fatigue, and decreased blood pressure. Next slide, please. So my next point is sleep. Sleep is so hard for me. It's very common in Parkinson's disease. Depending on the study that you quote, you can see sleep disorders anywhere from 70 to greater than 90% of the time. And it encompasses so many different types of problems. We see problems with insomnia. That includes going to sleep, but also people waking up frequently throughout the night. We see problems with people acting out their dreams, with having restless legs, with being uncomfortable at night because their medicines are wearing off. Medicines themselves can cause side effects that affect sleep. And I hear it all the time that people have no energy during the day. And so there's lots of studies out there that show sleep is connected to a lot of different things. It's connected to worse quality of life, disability, worse cognition or thinking, mood problems, and even psychosis and hallucinations. Poor sleep has also been connected to patients with worse motor sores and more severe clinical presentations. And that's kind of the chicken or the egg. Is the sleep causing the worst clinical presentations, or the clinical presentations just associated with worse sleep? Next slide, please. So my personal experience is rather trite, but patients that sleep better feel better. They're able to do more. They're able to exercise more. They just feel better. Sleep was mentioned several times in our last International Movement Disorder Conference, which was held in October of 2020. I also wanted to make mention on this slide this weird phenomenon called sleep benefit. I hear this all the time from my patients that, they go to sleep, they're off their medicines for 7 to 8 hours, and they wake up and they feel great. That happens for a couple hours, and they have to start taking their medications. We don't really understand this phenomenon. For some of the studies I've seen, this can occur in up to 30 to 50% of patients. It's a little counterintuitive, but in a study that I saw in 2019, this sleep benefit phenomenon was actually correlated with worse sleep efficiency, worse overall symptoms, and longer disease duration. So again, it's a weird phenomenon we don't totally understand, but sleep is definitely affecting how you function. Next slide, please. So this group of slides is not really meant to talk about management, but just as an aside, treatment for sleep can be really, really difficult. We have a lot of strategies that we employ depending on what the problem is. We focus a lot on sleep hygiene, so patients going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, keeping their bedroom cool and dark, not having pets in the bed, not doing something activating near the time you want to go to bed, like watching TV, getting on their phone, trying to turn the lights down as you start to want to go to bed at night. Trying to reduce medications that may cause side effects. There's lots of medications out there that can affect sleep. Exercise is so important on sleep. I really encourage patients to exercise in the middle part of the day. Don't exercise right before you go to bed, because again, it's another activating thing. We also talk about stimulants during the day if you're struggling with fatigue, or what we call daytime somnolence, where you just fall asleep at the drop of a hat. So there's medication and non-medication options for that. And then we use medications at night to help sleep, and those really depend on what the actual sleep problem is. And sometimes that's hard to pinpoint, and sometimes there's multiple different issues. But primary sleep aids, we'll use Parkinson medication if you're going off at night and just really uncomfortable at night. We use medications for restless legs. And then one thing I didn't mention earlier is a lot of patients urinate a lot throughout the night, and that can keep them up. And that can be really difficult for folks. So we'll use medications to kind of reduce the need to urinate at night. Next slide, please. So social interaction. I think during the COVID pandemic, we've really seen that people not associating with other people is a big problem. There's several studies that have come out now that Parkinson's patients have really had a difficult time during this period. Their symptom control is worse. Their overall status is worse. People are just really struggling. And part of that is because patients aren't exercising as much, but also patients are not interacting as much. That can get people down, and we know that depression and mood concerns are connected to worse outcomes in Parkinson's. And it just underscores the point that it's so important to stay connected and engaged in your Parkinson's journey. The last thing I had is much like sleep, social interaction was actually brought up quite a bit in our International Movement Disorder Conference just a couple months ago. So this slide and my next slide are kind of some general conclusions. Again, I didn't really go into it, but we're going to have 2 presentations on it. The best evidence I have is on exercise in terms of things that help Parkinson's patients that are not medications. That is so important. I put it in bold. So exercise, exercise, exercise. Supplements, I know, are really interesting for a lot of folks. We all want to make the disease better, and certainly supplements are intriguing. But much like a lot of the medications that we study, we just haven't gotten the evidence to support them, even though the concepts are really engaging and exciting. And so we just don't have the evidence for supplements. So just please be careful of them. And as I put in the next bullet point, when they've been studying our highest level of trials, we haven't even been able to complete the trial because the data that we're getting midpoint just doesn't justify continuing the trial. The gut and how it contributes to Parkinson's disease is really exciting right now. There's a lot of interest, a lot of experiments being done and studies being done. I think it's a little early for probiotics. Again, I get a lot of questions about that. I just would be cautious because we just don't know exactly how the bacteria is different in Parkinson's disease and what the consequences of increasing or lowering some of those bacteria are. Next slide. Next slide. No clear benefit for cannabis. Again, there's a lot of small studies that have been done. Most of them, even at small numbers, have not shown a lot of benefit, at least on the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and none of our big organizations are supporting it. You need to be careful because it's not regulated. I do know when I looked on clinicaltrials.gov before this presentation, I looked on this as well. There's at least a trial in Colorado that's looking at this. I don't know of anything here locally that's being done in a clinical trial to look at cannabis. And just let my last couple of slides just reemphasizing the importance of sleep and social interaction on Parkinson's care. These are really important concepts that we're recognizing more and more. And then finally, I don't have a magic fix. I wish I did. But getting back to that slide I had, you got to be healthy, you got to be active, and you got to be engaged. I think those are the most important things I can tell you from non-medication therapies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tolleson. That was a lot of information packed in. So now we're going to take some questions from our web audience. So I'd like to encourage you guys to continue submitting your questions. I know we've gotten a few. We'd also like to invite Larry to join us. Larry is a person living with Parkinson's. He is in the Knoxville area. So Larry, we're going to have you join us now. Hey, Larry, how are you?
Good morning, doing well.
Good. So Larry, I'm going to start sending you a few questions for Dr. Tolleson. Thank you for being here. But Dr. Tolleson, I'm going to kick things off, I think, with our first question while we get situated. So I know you talked a lot about sleep and sleep hygiene. Are there any sort of all natural remedies that you feel are actually effective for sleep, such as magnesium and melatonin?
So the one I probably use the most is melatonin. I've had a couple of patients recently really tell me that magnesium really helped them. I honestly don't know a ton of data on magnesium, but melatonin has quite a bit of data out there. The one thing that we use the most, or use melatonin the most for, is dream enactment. This is a very common problem with Parkinson's patients where they thrash around, call out, and hit their spouse, fall out of bed. I mean, so it can be problems for both the patient and the spouse. And melatonin has a lot of good data on it. So that's usually the one I start with. It seems to have the least amount of side effects. If I have to go to a medication, benzodiazepines or mild sedatives are the best. In particular, something called clonazepam.
All right. And what, I know you mentioned, again, exercise. What time of day should somebody exercise so that it doesn't interfere with sleep? Because I know exercise is good for sleep, but you don't want it to interfere with your sleep.
Yeah, so 2 points on that. So there's actually been a couple of recent papers out about how beneficial exercise is on sleep. So I just want to underscore that point. And again, that was a common topic at the movement disorder conference we had in October. But I would tell you, you need to do it earlier in the day, no later than mid-afternoon, because again, it is activating. If you do it right before you go to bed, you're going to have trouble sleeping.
We're looking for dietary recommendations that will help with constipation.
So yeah, lots of fiber is really important. I commonly recommend prune juice because that seems to help. Also water. Drinking lots of water can help. Coconut oil, I've heard that one as well.
You say coconut oil?
Yeah.
How about increasing dopamine naturally? Is there a good way to do that?
Yeah, so from my slides, I mean, the two things that I probably recommend the most are the velvet bean, and I had some pictures of what that looked like. You can get it in supplement form with mucuna, and then the fava bean, which is a green bean. It's probably the other way that I recommend getting dopamine.
What was that first bean you mentioned again?
The velvet bean, mucuna.
Great. I saw one study about probiotics dealing with healing PD and invertebrates out of Scotland. Are you familiar with that one? I'm
not familiar with that particular one, but I know there's been quite a few studies now in animals that are showing some potential protection.
Back to probiotics, they tend to help me with bowel regulation. But is there another supplement I should try?
In terms of something like probiotics naturally or versus like a supplement form?
Naturally, other than yogurt. I'm not a big fan of yogurt.
Yeah, so fermented milks can have a lot of probiotics in them. I mean, those are probably the two things I mention more than anything.
What do you think of intermittent fasting? 16 hours of not eating and aiming to clear and help the guts for PD patients.
I wouldn't do that. I think that I just don't think we have the evidence on that. That would make me a little bit nervous. They have done bowel cleansing studies and enema studies. I've seen a little bit of benefit with those. I just think it's too early.
If you're already taking levodopa, should you also take 5-hour velvet beans to bolster your dopamine even more?
No, so the natural sources of dopamine, so the velvet bean and the fava bean that I mentioned, don't have that carbidopa, and so the absorption you're getting from those is going to be less. I don't commonly recommend people take those supplements or those extra parts of their diet with the feeling they're going to get a more dramatic response. I think, though, if you're trying to have a balanced diet, if you can work that stuff into your diet, I think that would be good. But I wouldn't take those things every time you take a medication just to make sure you're getting more dopamine. I wouldn't work that way.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned fermented milk. I'm not familiar with that. Where will you find it?
I think you probably need to go to a more advanced grocery store. Probably something like a Whole Foods would carry that. I'm not sure like a regular Kroger or things like that would carry it.
Do you have any specific recommendations for reducing stress?
Oh, that's a good one. There's so many things out there. I know exercise will reduce stress. I know we're plugging that a lot. Meditation, yoga, identifying your triggers and trying to avoid them. Just getting out of the environment that causes the stress, going for walks. There's a lot of different things out there. If it gets to that point, making sure you have a counselor or a psychiatrist, just having a good support network can also do the trick. And then finally, medications if it comes to it.
How does one get back from periods of non-activity?
You mean to start an exercise?
Yes.
What I tell my patients is you just got to do something. I mean, start slow and then kind of build it up. You need to find something that you enjoy. Don't worry so much about the research and very specific types of exercise. I like high intensity exercise if you can do it. But more than anything, I just tell people to do something. So find something that you like that you can kind of build up. Maybe that's going for walks, and that's where you start. Maybe that's just stretching. I mean, everybody's different. But you just got to start somewhere, just like anything. I tell my boys all the time, if you want to be good at something, you got to practice it. So, and that's usually at a very base level. And then as you get better, you can kind of intensify what you're doing and kind of expand what you're doing.
At what point should someone consider DBS?
So deep brain stimulation is an add-on therapy for Parkinson's patients. It's complementary to the medication. And when we really start thinking about that procedure is when medications are not doing the job any longer. In some patients, that's very early with things like a medicine-resistant tremor. But for the most part, we're thinking of patients that their medicine's just not lasting as long, and it's not lasting from dose to dose, or their medicine is complemented, or their medicine dosing is complicated by what we call dyskinesias, which is that wiggling, writhing type movement that we see in some Parkinson's patients. And that can be real frustrating for some people.
And our final question is, before taking any vitamins or supplements, would you recommend blood work?
I guess in the one I probably would recommend is B6, probably checking your B6 levels, but I don't routinely check, blood levels of different things before people take supplements.
Thank you, Dr. Tolleson. We appreciate your efforts.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope those were helpful answers. Those were good questions.
Yeah, well, thank you both, Dr. Tolleson and Larry. You are an excellent moderator, so thank you. So we will have another presentation that will focus more on the benefits of exercise. So if you guys do have questions related to physical therapy or exercise, you can definitely save those for Dr. Adkins. So now we are going to hear from Amy Shafer, who is going to lead us in a fitness demonstration. And Amy is with the University of Tennessee Community Fitness Center. So she is going to lead us in a little fitness demo. Hi, Amy, how are you?
Hello, good.
So please feel free to participate with Amy. At the very least, you can get up and stretch. And Amy, take it away.
All right. Well, yes, as Amy said, you can participate along with me. If you feel more comfortable staying seated, you can do that. And if you just want to observe, that's perfectly fine as well. You know your body, you know what works best. So if something I show you doesn't feel good, don't do it. If something feels unsafe, don't do that either. So the idea is to get up, get a little bit of movement, get that blood flowing, and increase our range of motion. So either seated or go ahead and stand up with me, and we're going to spend about 30 seconds on each exercise. And what I want to start with is just a really big shoulder roll up to those ears, back and down. So they don't have to be fast right now. We're just getting things moving. But as we do go through these exercises, we want to focus on larger movements. I'm going to give you some that we try to move a little bit quicker with, and then some that we have to do two things at once. So doing a dual task. We're going to go about 10 more seconds with the shoulder rolls. So just up, back, and down. Then let's relax those shoulders, and we're going to try an arm swing. So this is where you guys are just going to have your arms hanging by your side. So if you're seated in a chair without arms, this will be easy to do there. If you're not, we could even do some little swings up here. So the idea is that we're going to go as far as our range of motion allows without pain. So for some of you, you may be way up here, and that's fine. I want you to go as big as you can with no pain. Let's go 10 more seconds. So this is more of a swing, just letting momentum help, and relax it. All right, we're going to move down to the hips. I'll show a seated version in just a second, but I want you guys to do big hula hoops all the way around. If you're seated, you can still do this. Just do like you're circling and you're shifting your weight. We can move that torso a little bit more. We're more in that seated position. And if you haven't, let's switch and go the other direction. Nice and big. And then our final one we're going to do as part of our quick warm up is a trunk rotation. So these can be, again, seated or standing. We're going to have our arms out, and I want you all to alternate twisting that trunk and trying to touch this other hand. So you guys keep going, and I'm going to talk you through a couple of things. What the tendency here is when the trunk won't turn far enough for this hand to touch, is to bring this hand to this hand. I want this one to stay fixed out here and just get as close as you can. So if you don't touch it, that's okay. Let's try 10 more seconds. Twisting, and if you can, look at those hands so we're turning that neck as well. Let's go 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, little break. So those are just some examples of some dynamic movements that get the joints moving, loosened up, and increase our range of motion. So if we were going to get our heart rate up a little bit more, we're going to try just for 4 minutes, 30-second exercises. So the first one I want you to try with me are just punches. So if we're standing, we're going to get going with some arm punches. So we're not fully extending and walking the elbow, but it's pretty straight. And I want you to try to get these quick. So if you're seated, you can join in. If you're standing and you want to take it up a notch, we're going to march at the same time. And so that's all we're going to do for this 30 seconds. So you only have about 10 more seconds. 30 seconds goes by super quick. But this was that trying to get a higher intensity movement in, like Dr. Tolleson was talking about. Let's go 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, now we're going to bring it down just a little, but we're going to focus on a really big move. I want you guys to step forward as far as you can, reach those hands, and then as you step back, open up the chest. Then we're going to switch and open. If you're seated, we can still do that big reach forward, big reach back, big reach forward, big reach back. So let's go 5 more seconds here. So that should give us about enough time to do 1 more on each side. Perfect. All right, now we're going to go back to those punches, but I want you to punch them across your body. So we can do these seated or standing. So again, it's out quick and in quick, out in, and try to get that trunk rotation. So we want to reach across. Let's go about 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, and 1. So now what we're going to do, we're going to repeat these 3 exercises, but I'm going to change them up just a hair. So let's get started again on those forward punches. Out and in. So as you guys are punching, you guys keep punching, I want you to start to name people's names starting from A to Z in the alphabet. So for example, I'd go Amy, Beth, Carla, David. Start hollering those out. So nice and loud, pretend like I can hear you. So this is doing 2 things at once. So part of our brain is doing our movement. The other part is doing the recollection of these names. Let's go 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Awesome. All right, so now we have got that big step forward with that reach back again. So let's do that one. So big step forward. Open up that chest. So this is a really exaggerated move. So again, if you're in the chair, we're just going to do that top half. Reach it forward. Take it back. Reach it forward. Let's do 1 more on each side. And back 1 more big one. Awesome. All right, then we're going to finish up with those cross punches. So the way we're going to make this different is I'm going to holler out right, left. Then I may do right 2 times in a row or left. So you just try to keep up going the direction I'm telling you to go. And so I should be opposite you. So this should be right for you, left for you. So right, left, right, left, right, right, left, left, right, left, right, left, right, 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 left, left, right, left, left, take it back to singles. So that's a way that we can do a dual task as well. So I don't know if y'all were keeping up or not, but my brain was having a hard time telling you what to do and doing it, so I just stopped my arms. All right, so let's finish up with a couple of stretches, gentle stretches. So if you are still standing, go ahead and have a seat, because I want to do some rotation with this, with some trunk rotation. So what we're going to do is we're going to lift our arms up overhead, get a big deep breath in, and then as we exhale, we're going to twist, holding onto the chair and the outside of our leg, okay? So we're going to do big deep breath in. I want you to look up at those hands. Then as we exhale, we're going to twist and hold. So you're twisting as far as you can, and you're not holding your breath. So I want you guys to keep breathing. The next time you go to inhale, let's reach those arms overhead. Look up at those hands. Exhale, twist and hold to the other side. Again, we're going to keep breathing. We're going to do this one more time each side. And this time I want you to look over that shoulder when you do it. So big breath in, look up. Exhale and twist. Try to look over that shoulder behind you. Hold it there. Big inhale, stretch it tall. Look up at those hands. Exhale, twist and look over this shoulder. Hold it here. One more big inhale in. I want you to hold those arms up, and then I want you to lean to one side. This is our grand finale here. We're still breathing, don't hold your breath. Big breath in here. Exhale, twist to the other side. So we're just a little lean here. If you can keep those hands together, you can try to do that. And then back to the center. Exhale, down, and then we'll finish with a couple of those shoulder rolls like we started with. So I hope that gave you guys some ideas of just some basic things you could try, ways to make it a little more challenging, and ways if we need to be safer and stay in the chair, we can do that as well. So I hope we got our blood flowing and everybody feels good. And that is it for me, Miss Annie.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was
You are welcome.
Thanks for getting us up and moving.
Yeah.
Easy to forget how important it is to get out of our chair sometimes. So thank you.
It
so
is.
much. All right.
Thanks.
So now that we're sort of on this exercise train, we're going to keep it moving with Dr. Suzanne Adkins, who's our next presenter. Dr. Adkins is a physical therapist, clinical specialist for the Balance and Hearing Center at the University of Tennessee Medical Center. So Dr. Adkins, thank you for being here today.
Hello, thank you, Annie, and thank you, Amy. That was wonderful. I'm actually presenting from the library here at the medical center, so I'm sure everyone else enjoyed me getting up and moving there. But that was really wonderful. Thank you. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so hopefully we can see that. So I was asked to share on exercise in Parkinson's and kind of what the research says. So kind of the outline of my talk today will start by touching on a little bit of what the research says. There'll be quite a bit of information, but hopefully I'll be able to hit on some of the high points. And then if you're interested, you can always go back and look at some of the articles. So we want to look at what research says about exercise, not only for motor symptoms, which is what we typically think of initially with Parkinson's, and especially when we're talking about exercise. So that would be things like slowness of movement, postural changes, maybe some balance concerns, but also for some of the non-motor symptoms, such as cognition and sleep, things that Dr. Tolleson kind of mentioned earlier this morning. And then finally, the relationship between exercise and medication. But then really we want to bridge that gap between what the research says and then practically implementing that. So how do I get the best out of my exercise program, or even develop an exercise program? So we'll look at sort of general exercise guidelines, and then some local here in East Tennessee, but also online resources that may be beneficial. So this is a little bit of a busy diagram, but it's just the intent here is to show that Parkinson's, as we've seen, really is a disease that impacts multiple systems. And exercise really stands in kind of a unique position to address symptoms from across those systems. So there's really promising research in terms of exercise, which Dr. Tolleson mentioned multiple times. Before we get into the research articles, I just want to touch on the fact that typically we sort of separate out exercise into the 4 basic types. And so they'll touch on these in the research articles. So strength or resistance training, aerobic or cardiovascular type activities, flexibility and stretching, and then balance activities. So first, let's touch on some of the motor symptoms. So bradykinesia is that slowness of movement that we see a lot of times in walking, but also in functional tasks like getting up out of bed, maybe getting out of the car, turning over in bed, turning. And so it certainly impacts things like balance and stability as well. And it's thought that bradykinesia is not only associated with the part of the brain that's impacted with Parkinson's and kind of those motor circuits, but also just a general muscle weakness that comes with aging and not being quite as physically active. So the thought is, can we strengthen muscles and in that way improve bradykinesia? So these 2 articles here kind of touch specifically on strength training. And they looked at different types of strength training, more high intensity, and then just more typical resistance training, and then power-based resistance training. And really saw that across the board, there was benefit in terms of bradykinesia and strength in general. In their particular studies, which only were over 12 weeks, they really didn't show a definitive difference between different types of exercise, specifically that first article. But in some of the other studies that have been done over 1 to 2 years, which is hard to actually do, but over 1 to 2 years, that's when we maybe start seeing some of the difference between being involved in more high intensity versus moderate intensity. And there's actually currently a study that's entering into like a phase 3 clinical trial that's specifically trying to differentiate between moderate and high intensity intervention. The gentleman that Dr. Tolleson showed a video of actually has participated in a study with that same group. So exciting research to be sure. And then this third article, this is looking more at an aerobic intervention. So cycling showed pretty significant improvements in bradykinesia, but also stiffness and tremor. Specifically with this article, the improvements were seen in the forced aerobic exercise group. So in this setup, forced aerobic exercise was where there was, for the participant on the cycle, there was someone in the captain position who was actually allowing them to cycle at a higher intensity than they would voluntarily choose to do. And so that was the key component in making it more beneficial. Then in terms of gait and balance and turning, this comprehensive review looked at the literature specifically focusing on, okay, what are the long-term effects? So we do these interventions, do the benefits persist? So in terms of the benefits with gait training or walking type interventions, we definitely see improvements in speed, walking capacity, step length, and encouragingly, those improvements persisted for up to 6 months after the intervention was done. And similarly with balance training, we see those improvements of balance and also walking and mobility that persist up to a year afterwards, and significantly can reduce fall rate up to 85%, which is really encouraging. In terms of some of the non-motor symptoms, cognitive impairments, we tend to see this primarily with executive function type activities. So planning, the ability to plan or organize or dual task or sequence different tasks. This study in 2011 did show with resistance and aerobic exercise a significant improvement across those areas. And this 2017 study was really looking at how, and so it appears that exercise really modifies the way that the brain, the patterns that the brain is activated in. So kind of decreasing the reliance on that frontal region where we carry out those executive functions, and specifically with motor cognitive training. So that would be doing a physical activity where we also add in another sort of dual task, which Amy did a brilliant job of showing. Okay, and then in terms of sleep, Dr. Tolleson mentioned about exercise being a great resource there. And certainly this study in 2015 was a meta-analysis. So I think it was 66 different studies. But this was just in the general population. So exercise showed benefit both acutely. So right after, you exercise that day, and immediate benefits that night. They do say, I think we've touched on this, but they do say ideally 3 to 8 hours prior to sleeping. That's quite a range, but that's what they found. But in addition to that, there's also additional benefit from regular exercise over time, specifically with the quality of sleep. And additional research has shown that those findings also are appropriate in the Parkinson's specific population. In terms of mood problems such as depression and anxiety, this article showed both aerobic and resistance training as being beneficial. And encouragingly, I think that final bullet point, the aerobic exercise, done pretty significantly. So we're looking at 5 days a week, 30 to 45-minute sessions, but helped individuals who hadn't actually had much improvement using antidepressant medication. And this systematic review specifically outlined that you need at least 90 minutes of moderate intensity a week to really achieve those benefits. And then finally, in terms of the relationship to medication, so research has been done that shows that exercise helps to improve specifically the motor response that we see with levodopa. So they compared people on a day where they did exercise and then when they were at rest, and specifically 2 to 2.5 hours after taking the levodopa on the day with exercise, their motor response was significantly better. And then some of the side effects that we see with longer term use of levodopa, such as the dyskinesia that Dr. Tolleson mentioned, studies have noted that that exercise can possibly partially prevent the development of those levodopa-induced dyskinesias. Okay, so kind of the takeaways from all of that is there's no doubt that we know exercise is beneficial, but it's encouraging. It's also beneficial to specifically tackle some of the Parkinson's symptoms, and not just those motor symptoms, but across multiple systems. There's still research has its limitations, certainly. So there's still more research to be done in terms of, okay, what would be the ideal type of exercise to do to target specific symptoms. But it is clear that you really do want to try and incorporate multiple types of exercise into your program to get those benefits that we saw there. Okay, so let's move on now to how we practically apply this. So hopefully we'll kind of touch on some ways to either whether you have an exercise program already and you just kind of want to fine tune it and try and apply some of that research, or you're starting from scratch and you say, okay, let's try and build something here. Just as Dr. Tolleson said, I think it's huge just to move, like, especially if you're not doing anything, something is more than nothing. And we'll touch on that a bit at the end. But again, just to reiterate, we want to try and incorporate all 4 of these basic exercise types. The general guidelines and recommendations for the population at large in terms of exercise certainly applies to people with Parkinson's, with maybe a couple of adaptations to know, and to realize that over time, those recommendations might change in terms of your individual routine. So for aerobic activity, so that'd be things like walking, jogging, swimming, the recommendation is 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise each week. So that could be 5 days of 30-minute sessions. In terms of the intensity, moderate intensity technically means that you are doing an activity where your heart rate is sitting at about 65 to 75% of your heart rate max, which is determined simply by subtracting your age from 220. Sounds a little bit complicated if you don't like math, but it's really quite basic. So let's say you're 70 years old, your heart rate max would be 150. And a moderate intensity exercise would be one where you're getting to a heart rate of about 100, 110 beats per minute. So that's pretty easy to monitor, simply your heart rate at your wrist, or if you have a smartwatch, you can kind of see what your heart rate is doing during activity. If that's all a bit much, you can also, there's something called the talk test, which basically moderate intensity activity is an activity where you can still, you know, it's demanding, but you can still engage in a steady conversation while you're doing it. Okay, so in terms of the other 3 types of exercise, you're looking at trying to build in 2 to 3 sessions a week in each category. So with strengthening, you want to try and hit 8 to 10 major muscle groups. And specifically with some of the postural changes we tend to see with Parkinson's, kind of that forward flex posture, we really want to encourage strengthening with some of the what we call the extensor muscles. So that would facilitate that upright posture. Also in the legs as well, with things like getting up off of lower surfaces. And then similarly with flexibility, one of the areas that we see a fair amount of stiffness or rigidity is in the trunk. And actually, the reduced arm swing that we see is in part related to that rigidity we see at the trunk. So normally when we walk and we get kind of a passive movement of our arms, we swing our arms back and forth as we walk, in part because our trunk is kind of rotating back and forth. So when that's stiff, you kind of limit the amount of swing you get, which also impacts things like balance. So incorporating some kind of stretching of the trunk into your flexibility portion would be great. Amy actually showed some great movements there to do that. And then balance, this really is person specific, I find. I mean, certainly you want to try and incorporate things like agility and coordination, but also kind of knowing what your limitations are and where you maybe need to focus your attention. So it's all good and well to know all of these things, but I think we also all know that the harder part is actually doing them. So you really want to find something that motivates you. And even if you don't love group activity, some people love it, absolutely. But even if you don't love group activity, probably group classes or some kind of group setup is going to be the best at really maintaining your exercise program. So I'm going to kind of show you some resources. A lot of these are online. I know not everyone is in East Tennessee, but Rock Steady Boxing, this is something that probably many of you are familiar with and some participate in, but it is a boxing class specifically for people with Parkinson's. The website is there. Boxing is really a lovely combination movement. So if you think of those 4 exercise groups that we talked about, with boxing, you're getting kind of flexibility at the trunk with that rotation. It's certainly aerobic and strengthening. You're also incorporating balance tasks with kind of the stepping strategies and some cognitive demand as well. So it's a really lovely intervention or exercise to do. Currently, I believe in East Tennessee, at least, there's just one class that is still live, and that is at Fort Sanders Health and Fitness Center, I believe, Mondays at 1:30, but they might have more info on the website there. But Zach Guza, who started the Parkinson's Gym, which is the information below there, he's a personal trainer who he's also a Rock Steady Boxing coach, and I believe he's actually taken his classes online over the past year. So like I said, he started the Parkinson's Gym. This is a really lovely, it's a wonderful resource. You can become a member, and basically there's over 50 workouts on demand that really vary in intensity, and I think can meet a real variety of people, their needs in terms of whether they need to be sitting or doing more high intensity type activities. He also does live workouts 3 days a week and has lots of information with his blog. So that's a great resource to check out. And then Pedaling for Parkinson's is one of the cycling classes for Parkinson's that's held at the Y. Here in East Tennessee, there are 2 down at the bottom of the screen there, Davis Y and the Northside Y, that are still doing in-person classes. They space out and take precautions, but there's more information online about that. And then finally, of course, I will make a plug for physical or occupational therapy. I really do think this is a wonderful resource if you haven't already seen a physical therapist. For multiple reasons. I think, one, it gives you an opportunity for sort of a one-on-one consult to see, okay, where for me specifically, the research is all good and well, but for me specifically, where perhaps areas that I need to focus more of my attention on. And then also taking some of that and really working on that functionally with not just exercise for the sake of exercise, but also how do I carry that over into improving things like buttoning my shirt, dressing, getting out of bed. And then also I think it provides sort of a baseline, and it provides a set of evaluation that then you can kind of monitor over time. So whether it's every 6 months or every year, but coming back in for a checkup and see how you're doing. With the Parkinson's specific population, there's a couple of different programs that are specific to Parkinson's. Both of these that I have on the slide here are actually done by the same group and based on the same research. So they're both LSVT Big and PWR are both aimed at incorporating really large amplitude movements, hence the word big and power. So the idea here is we're trying to tackle that bradykinesia or small stiff movements and really overdo the movements to kind of normalize your everyday movement. So LSVT Big is a bit more structured. It has to be done 4 weeks, 4 days a week. They're 1-hour classes. It incorporates sort of a set of 7 basic exercises that are done, but kind of progressed in challenge for the entire time, both in the clinic and at home. And then it also incorporates functional tasks or things that you may be having difficulty with. PWR, similar type activities, but not quite as structured. So modified based on kind of what your needs are. So finally, practically, I think it may be a nice idea even this weekend or later today to kind of sit down and give yourself 15, 20 minutes to kind of look at where you are with exercise, whether that's nothing right now or whether you have a pretty significant routine, and just see, okay, what changes do I want to make? I think, even in therapy, when someone comes in, the first thing we're asking is, okay, what are you having difficulty with? And where do you want to go? What do you want to get better? And so I think it can be helpful to actually sit down. I mean, this is a huge investment, and we've already shown the benefit that you can get from exercise, and it's phenomenal, really, and it's an opportunity. And so I think to take some time to really prioritize that and to say, okay, where do I want to be? What do I want to work on? And how am I going to get there? I think motivation is huge. So also figuring out what you have in terms of your own support system, but then reaching out into some of these other community activities. And the Parkinson's Foundation has a lot of resources on their website. So yeah, but I hope you take away from today that it is really encouraging what you can get out of exercise, and it can be enjoyable. And I hope you have some ideas going forward as to how to implement that. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. Really, really informative. So now we're going to take a few questions from our web audience, and to help us with that, I'd like to invite Pete, who is living with Parkinson's in the Knoxville area. Pete's going to join us on camera to ask you a few follow-up questions. Hey, Pete.
Hey, good morning.
Pete.
And I also want to remind everybody who's with us today not to go anywhere. We're going to get to panel discussion right after this Q&A session, and during which you'll get to hear from Pete and Larry and April. They're going to share more about their experiences with some of these non-medication and complementary therapies. So definitely stick around for that. So Pete, I will let you take it away and start asking Dr. Adkins some follow-up questions.
Well, great. Thanks for that. Dr. Adkins, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
It was great to hear you mention our coach, Zach, and the Parkinson's gym. I'm a participant in that and have had a lot of fun and really, it's really helped me with all aspects of my physical well-being. So I appreciate that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Are there one of the questions that came up was regarding kind of the tightness in the joints, the hips maybe, it has to do with that rigidity a little bit. Are there any particular things that you recommend for somebody that is so afflicted, so to speak?
Sure. Yeah. So again, I think it depends on the person. I mentioned briefly kind of the postural changes we see. So that's not only typically at the shoulders, kind of that rounded posture, but also at the hips, as you mentioned. And so we like to incorporate stretching of those hip flexor muscles, which just sit on the front of your thighs there. And one of the ways, there's some different stretches you can do in standing, but a nice way to get a stretch in those hip flexors is if you lie right towards the end of your bed, don't fall off, but keep the opposite leg bent and you kind of bring the other leg off the side of the bed to let it sort of hang down, and you get a nice sort of gravity assisted stretch at your hip flexor there. You keep the other leg bent both for stability, but also to ease off on your back. And then if you want to get a bit more of a stretch there, you can bend the knee a little bit. So you do have to have a high enough bed to do that. Otherwise you'll be limited by the floor there. But that's one example, but definitely a great idea to incorporate hip flexor stretching into your routine.
Okay, great tip there.
And
go
ahead.
One thing that I struggle with, and another participant has also mentioned it, is in the morning, it seems like my toes want to go, kind of curl up. It's a little discomforting. And I've tried, kind of stretching and stuff like that. But do you have any recommendations for folks with kind of the toe curl thing working?
Yeah, off the top of my head, probably what I would go to first is actually, so once you've done some kind of general stretching, seated or maybe lying down, then getting up and getting into kind of a foot flat position, maybe supported at the wall, and just doing weight shifting. So basically shifting your weight, supported, but shifting your weight back just kind of to the limit of your stability and then forward through your feet. So you're looking at kind of pushing the balls of your feet down and then toes down, just to use basically weight to try and get that stretching, a more effective stretching. And kind of a slow movement, being aware of where your hips are over your feet, transitioning forward and then back. So it's kind of easing them into what you're asking them to do the rest of the day.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to try that. One of the things that someone's asked about is they notice that after exercising, their tremors seem to increase. Is that normal, or do you notice that?
I don't know, actually. I have not seen that particularly. I wonder, one of the things I'd wonder about is timing with medication. I haven't seen that on a regular basis. I mean, you may be able to talk to that more than I can, but.
Yeah, usually I almost feel like personally I have the opposite experience. Like after exercising, I feel better, but one of our participants says that after exercise, as well as after some outdoor activities, in a kind of high heat situations, that they notice an increase in tremor. So I wanted to ask them.
Interesting, yeah.
Can you reiterate the best exercise for improving balance?
Oh, So I actually work at the Balance Center. This is
Yeah.
what I do day in and out. So I kind of work with people with a wide variety of reasons as to why their balance is off. So I can't stress enough that it really depends on the person. So this is where I would say like getting an evaluation is huge. Balance is a complex system that really incorporates multiple systems that are helping to know where you are in space so that you can then do the correct balance reaction or strategy to address that. So, you know, I think that's where that individual evaluation comes in. A lot of times with Parkinson's specifically, I tend to see that the instability is in a posterior or backwards direction. For most people, we feel more comfortable shifting our weight forward than backward. And that's simply because we have a whole foot to shift forward on versus just the heel to go backward on. So if you're standing and I try and shift forward through my toes, I get a much greater displacement forward than I do backwards. And I feel like I'm going to fall. So a lot of times, kind of gradually working with weight shifting as an intervention. And again, it depends on where you're at. That could be simply standing near a counter and taking a step forward, shifting your weight through that foot, and taking a step all the way back, shifting your weight. And really you're paying attention to what's happening at my feet, what's happening at my hips, what's happening at my upper body. How am I shifting my weight? Balance is basically effectively shifting your weight, right? If you don't effectively shift it, then you fall. So the idea here is, can we do, you know, with that stiffness and bradykinesia that we see, we tend to have smaller movements and our limits of stability, that weight shifting tends to decrease. And so because it doesn't feel fun to shift out of that limit of stability, you feel like you're going to fall. So part of balance intervention is safely kind of showing you how you can move into that and kind of progress that so that you can move more easily and more safely. So sort of a long-winded answer, but yeah.
Okay, very good. We have a participant that's saying that during the COVID period, which we're now into about a year or not, you know, I've stopped temporarily exercising because of contact things.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm struggling with movement
Mm-hmm.
and feel like I've kind of regressed. Would you recommend some intense therapy like LSVT big?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So, and really, you know, use that as a motivation. I mean, the fact that you have seen over the past year with not doing as much activity, changes and decline in your movement, like that should be your motivation going forward to continue exercising. I just want to make that note. But in terms of LSVT big specifically, one of the fantastic things about it is that it really is for anybody. So at any level of movement. So I work with people who are very high level, high functioning. We can always make it more challenging, and also people who have a hard time getting up out of a chair. So there's, you know, LSVT big can really be altered depending on your need. And yeah, I think it would be, I think it would be absolutely fine. I think it would be a great intervention to do, as long as you're willing to put in that time. So the biggest thing with LSVT big is it is a time commitment, really for the good. So yeah, you have to be willing.
Well, thank you, Pete and Dr. Adkins. You guys did a phenomenal job with the questions and the answers. So thank you so much. I know this information is really helpful for our web audience, especially that last question. I know a lot of people are experiencing sort of you know, the aftermath of COVID and many different aspects. So thank you, thank you. So now to conclude today's program, we are actually going to hear from some of our people with Parkinson's panelists. So we're going to invite Pete and Larry and April to join us on camera today, as well as Dr. Tolleson, who is going to be moderating today's discussion panel. So we'll give everybody a minute to join us on camera. And thank you again for being here. I know Dr. Tolleson's just going to have each of you guys introduce yourselves, and then he's going to jump into some questions. So take it away.
Yeah, before I do that, I just wanted to comment on a couple things we've heard. I feel like I bungled a lot of questions that you guys gave me. They were fantastic questions. A minor one was the sesame seed thing. I just looked it up. There's a couple things out that came out earlier this month, actually. So whoever asked me that question is staying on top of things. It looks like a trial on cells that showed some benefit. But again, I think it's just out this month. It's too early. It's not been done in clinical trials or in humans that I'm aware of. Vitamin D is something that has been talked about for a while with Parkinson's disease. And again, I just handled that question so poorly, but in population studies, we have seen some definite decrease in vitamin D with our Parkinson's population. Whether or not it's protective or not, we don't know. But we have Parkinson's patients that fall, and vitamin D is really important for bone density. So it's important to have good vitamin D levels. We don't normally check it in the clinic, but it is important, like I said, for bone health. And then in terms of long-term progression, we're not sure. There's a lot of conflicting data out there that maybe it helps motor symptoms, maybe it doesn't. There's been quite a few studies out about that. As I said, I don't really routinely check it. It is something we're continuing to debate. I don't currently recommend my patients take extra vitamin D. A lot of times vitamin D levels are checked with their primary care physician. If they're particularly low, I would definitely recommend supplementing that. And one thing I heard during one of the exercise talks was my tremor gets worse with exercise. As a clinician, I hear that quite a bit, actually. I'm not saying that's the majority of people, but it definitely comes up. And I think the answer that it could be related to medications is a really good one. It certainly could be related to when you take your medicine. But I'd also say when people exercise, they're stressing their system. Sometimes they're also stressed emotionally. And that anytime you get your endorphins going, that can certainly increase tremor too. Sometimes it means taking a break from exercise a little bit and coming back to it. Maybe you need to adjust your exercise regimen. Maybe you need to push through it. I mean, you can try a lot of different strategies, but it is something I do hear from people when they exercise. Sometimes they'll take some extra medication before they exercise too. Let's get into the patient panel. So as Annie said, I thank you guys so much for taking your time today to talk about Parkinson's disease and be here for some of the people online. So please do introduce yourselves. I guess I'll start with Pete because he's the first one on my screen. And let's go to Larry. And I think I can't remember who else is on here. Amanda's on here, I'm sorry. So if three of you.
April's on here. April.
So if the three of you guys can introduce yourselves, maybe tell us how long your Parkinson's disease has been going on, and maybe just give a real quick overview of how Parkinson's disease has affected you.
Wow, well, I'll start. I'm Pete Duber in Knoxville, and diagnosed, I think, in 2015. It's been long enough to where that's a little fuzzy right now, but I got involved with probably one of the best decisions I made was Rock Steady Boxing when Zach opened that class in Knoxville. I don't know, is it lucky when you're in the very first class? So I can say I've been around the longest. It was cool at the time, maybe not so much anymore, but that is a wonderful class. I'd encourage anybody with Parkinson's, if they can't get into a Rock Study program, to get on the Parkinson's gym. And it's good socially, and it's very good exercise. I look forward to it today at 1:30.
Larry?
Yeah, my name's Larry Fry. I was diagnosed March of 2016. And luckily for me, I met Pete about 2 months later and got involved in the boxing as well. We really missed the in-person boxing. It was because it not only addressed our physical needs, but we got to interact with a lot of people sharing the same difficulties we were sharing, and we had a lot of fun.
April, you want to give us your journey?
My name's April Langley. I was diagnosed in September of 2017. Currently, I'm not involved with the rock study program, but I'm very interested in it. I do a lot of things on my own to try to help with exercise and stiffness and everything. And all this information today has just been wonderful.
I think that's a nice segue. April, maybe you can start, and then we'll talk to the other panelists. As you said, we've had a lot of good information on exercise, and that's been a real thrust of the presentation today, or the presentations. You said you kind of do some things on your own. What kind of things do you do? What's helped? And maybe we can talk to the other guys and get their viewpoints as well.
Well, currently what I'm doing is I try to get up every morning. I take my first carbidopa levodopa at 5. So I try to get up and do at least 2 miles every morning on the treadmill around that same time. I do some stretches and exercises when I first get up out of bed to help me get going. And that seems to help. I've also found that, especially since the days are getting prettier, if I take a walk during lunch, that it really helps me finish the day because I'm a phone nurse at the doctor that I work for. And so I sit a lot, and I have a timer on my phone that makes me get up and walk every now and then to keep me from getting stiff, because if I sit all day, it's uncomfortable by the time I leave. And for Valentine's Day, my husband thought I was crazy, but I asked for a speed bag because I was watching some exercises on TV or YouTube about some things, and it was eye-hand coordination. And that I'm not by any means fast or good at it, but that has really seemed to help me a lot with the grasp in my hands. It's helped me be able to focus myself to make my fist stay. And that's really helped me a lot. That's
great. Anything outside of just movement that you've seen exercise help you with?
I sleep better. You know, if something happens and I've not been able to do my typical routine, which I try to do it 7 days a week, but you know, if something happens, I can tell those nights that I don't sleep as well. Now, sleeping well is about a 5-hour span for me, but that's still better than what it used to be.
Great. Larry or Pete, what about you guys? I know
my journey with Parkinson's begins with my biggest asset, which was my wife. I was in shock and denial, and she jumped in and got online and found Rocksteady Boxing and found support groups, and that got us involved in Rocksteady Boxing, and that has been a life changer for me. Not only physically, but socially as well, because we build a group of friends and acquaintances with similar circumstances. Right now, due to COVID, we're not doing the Rocksteady Boxing at the gym. I'm doing it online with Zach at the Parkinson's gym 3 days a week. And I'm boxing with Zach through the Black Dog Fitness twice a week. So I see Zach more than I see anybody. And then occasionally, my wife and I do yoga together. She was a yoga instructor, so she helps me out there as well. Something else I just started 2 months ago, I found an app that says go from couch potato to running a 5K. And I think the time span was supposed to be in 30 days. I've stretched it a little bit over that, but I'm still doing that aerobically twice a week. One thing I really missed, though, is what we did before COVID as well, was ballroom dancing. I think ballroom dancing has a lot of benefits that you don't see on the surface, because in addition to balance and exercise, the lead has to judge from the beat of the music, the timing. I have to then decide what steps I'm going to make. Then I have to learn how to communicate that to my dance partner. So you get some mind exercise, you get balance, you get some aerobics, and you get some appreciation from your spouse.
There is research out there about dancing. I think dancing's great, and there are dancing programs around Knoxville. So that sounds wonderful. What about you, Pete? Anything
something that we haven't talked about yet this morning is the area of research. And you mentioned the SURE PD 3 clinical trial with inosine. I was a part of that in Nashville. Matter of fact, I put it out to our boxing group, And Larry actually rode shotgun with me over to Nashville, kind of got me started down that road. But, I had some bad preconceptions. I thought, well, I'm signing up for some, who knows what they'll be testing, and some glow in the dark drug or something like that. But all those preconceptions have been shattered. I've been very impressed with it, and have gone on to try to stay in touch on the research side, and have gotten the privilege of participating in some positive things. The Sure PD program has an home PD kind of a continuation. And I have a movement disorder specialist on video on a Zoom call every year, checks in with me to see how I'm doing, and what part of Parkinson's in my life has been affected. And there's a couple new ones that I'm looking into now. And of course, Michael J. Fox Trial Finder on the web is a great place to start. If you're interested in something like that, if other folks are out there interested in that path, I'd encourage them. It's been very positive for me.
So Pete, I think that's a nice segue into a different topic. So, social interaction was mentioned by Larry with his exercise. You're talking about, research is, all those I think are really important aspects of kind of fighting your disease. April, do you have anything outside of exercise that you thought has been beneficial to keep you engaged and kind of part of the Parkinson's community, and making you feel like you're fighting a little bit?
Well, I do. There's a lot of different things on Facebook that you can follow, a lot of different organizations that you can follow. I do read all the articles and things like that, and I, send back questions and things. I wished I had more time to be more involved in a group, but with still working, that kind of limits my time. But I try to do anything that comes out in an article. I try to read to see what might be beneficial. One of the things that I learned was meditation was good. And so that's something else that I've incorporated is, trying to do meditation every day to try to help with that. That kind of clears my mind and gets me not to be so concentrated on what's going on in my body.
I think that's great. I think support groups are wonderful. I highly encourage them. We have a listing of them. I think staying up to date on new research, one of those questions on sesame seeds, like I said, I wasn't aware of it. So it's always nice to have patients kind of sharpening you a little bit, kind of iron sharpens iron, right? So that's great. Larry, I kind of want to ask a similar question. Both Pete and April have been talking about staying engaged, support groups, and how have those helped you, and how have you utilized them with your own journey?
Well, the support group in Oak Ridge is the one we're most familiar with, and we've been quite active in that from the very beginning. And my wife is very involved in that as well. She had led a couple of fundraising drives, kept us active, and made a lot of money for Parkinson's research. But in addition to that, we're starting to meet with people on a limited basis, two to four couples maybe, and go to outside restaurants, terraces. We can have some interaction, but you're not right up in each other's face and not surrounded by a multitude of people.
Okay. I'm looking at the time. I could talk to you guys all day. I just want to be respectful of the people on here. I guess going back to Pete, and then I have each of you guys answer. Since our focus today was really on non-medication and complementary therapies, just as a general aside, like, what would you recommend to folks? What have you found to be most beneficial to you outside of medication? I'll start with Pete and then go to Larry again, and then get to April.
Oh, that's easy one to answer. I mean, just reach out to some of the support groups in your location. Larry mentioned PK Hope is Alive. .com in Oak Ridge, pjparkinsons.com here in Knoxville is very active in the community, and there's probably others that are easy to mention. Kimmy's one that's kind of a stealth organization. They do strictly some fundraising for research. KIMECND.com is another one to check into. But just being with other people with Parkinson's and sharing the journey, you learn a lot. And gosh, it's good to know that, you're not alone. And you always get much more out of it than you put in. It's a great group. New circles of friendship, that social interaction, very, very positive, very important.
What about you, Larry?
Well, one of the good things about Zach's gym, the Parkinson's gym, most of the participants were in his Rocksteady boxing class, and he has a chat box. So the whole time we're exercising, we barb each other and tell corny jokes and just remind each other that we're all human and we're all struggling in the same battle, and give each other encouragement. And that means a lot, just being able to talk to your friends who are in similar circumstances.
April?
One of the things that I have learned just working at a doctor's office, I've got to meet people that I would have never met otherwise being here, that have Parkinson's here. And, it gives me a conversation with them. And, a lot of them were very open to tell me what things that they do to help themselves. And, people will send me emails, or they'll call me sometime and say, hey, I went to this, or I've done this. And, that it's nice to be able to speak to others that's going through the same thing that I'm going through and understand. Now, as far as doing things other than medication, the exercise is a must for me. If I don't do the exercise, I can't function. And being open to new suggestions and new things, I'm always willing to try something new to make things better.
All that's really great advice, and I just really appreciate you guys sharing your stories and being on here. And thank you to the other presenters and to the Parkinson's Foundation. I think, again, a take home that all of you guys are saying, and I hope I mentioned in my slides as well, you got to be active. It's really important to be engaged and be as healthy as you can. I think those are all just overall good things to take from this. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you guys all so much. I just want to thank our presenters, moderators, panelists, all of you guys for your time today and for spending your morning with us. We truly appreciate it. And thanks again to our sponsors who make these programs possible. AbbVie, Amneal, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, Kiowa Kirin, Lundbeck. We invite you to view our full list of sponsors and learn more about them by visiting our chapter supporters page, which you can find in the chat. Today's program was recorded, so if you missed any of it in the beginning, trying to join the meeting, no worries at all. We did record the session today, and we'll email that out to all of our meeting registrants by next week. So we'd encourage you just to take a few minutes. Once this Zoom program ends, you should actually see a survey pop up on your screen. We would encourage you to fill out that survey, just very brief, so that we know how to improve these programs moving forward. And we want to hear from you. What do you want to know more about? What should the next program entail? So definitely try to complete that evaluation. And if there were questions not answered today, I did see one about where do I find online fitness resources? Please call our toll-free helpline, the Parkinson's Foundation helpline. Those team members are available Monday through Friday to answer any question that you might have related to Parkinson's, or just if you want somebody to talk to. They're fantastic. That number is 1-800-4PD-INFO. And again, try to join us next week for some of our PD Health at Home programs that we're doing, again, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So without keeping you guys any longer, I just, again, want to thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to Dr. Tolleson, Dr. Adkins, Amy, April, Larry, Pete. You guys were just wonderful and made today so informative and so impactful. So thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.